Hi, everyone. This is Jonathan Gates, President-elect OTC this year. Welcome to the first episode of what we're calling PODTC. So it's OTC's kind of version of a podcast. We don't know exactly how things are going to get released yet. It's probably just going to be on our YouTube channel, but it's going to be called PODTC because that's the way that we're going. But I am here with a couple of great colleagues of mine, Melissa Swafford from Tri-C and Mary Whitt from Columbus State. This is kind of the inaugural episode, so we thought that it would be a good idea to have the presidential board here. So we have Mary is our current president, Melissa was our president last year, and our current past president. So there's a lot of wisdom for me over the last couple of years to learn before I become president after this year's conference. But I've appreciated working with these two quite a bit, and I am looking forward to this conversation that we're going to have today. But just to start off, I'm going to ask them both to introduce themselves, and I spoil where they work already, but just a little bit about them, maybe where they went to school or anything else that they would like to share. Since Melissa was the first president in this line, why don't we just start with you, Melissa?
Thanks, Jonathan. So as Jonathan said, Melissa Swafford, and I work at Tri-C, really Cuyahoga Community College, but I have a hard time saying that. So I always just say Tri-C, which is funny. Anyways, so I am director of the transfer centers here at Tri-C college-wide. We are 4 campuses and multiple other sites. So I do oversee all the transfer center. Just a little bit of how I ended up here, because it is a long story as I started thinking about it. But, I've been in higher ed over 20 years. I grew up and have always, for the most part, lived in Northeast Ohio. I attended Kent State University, go Flashes. I, interestingly enough, have a Bachelor of Arts in biology. And yes, you heard me correctly, Bachelor's of Arts. I didn't want to take that organic chemistry once I decided I was not going to use my biology degree. So I switched from a BS to a BA. And then I have a Master's of Arts in College Student Personnel from Bowling Green State University. So that was my school. I have no plans on going back anytime soon. That CSP burned me out. But like I said, I've been working in higher ed for 20 years. I worked at Marietta College in Southern Ohio, good old Kent State University. And I am in my 12th year at Tri-C now. I have done primarily the first 15 years was in student activities, Greek life, and leadership. I started working in transfer, I'll get to this more later, but in about 2018. And fun fact, thing I never thought I'd do in higher education, but I was an athletic director for a year and a half at Tri-C. So I wide range of things, locations and everything, but loving my work with transfer students right now. So.
Thanks, Melissa. Mary?
Yeah, so hey, I graduated from Bowling Green State University. And I have a Bachelor of Liberal Studies degree, and that really is the start of my journey working in higher education. I got misadvised, as so many academic advisors turn out to have been, and I got off of track for graduation. I switched to the BLS just so I could get out in 4 years. And then I went to Miami University for college student personnel. So I spent 2 years there, and I had originally went into college student personnel with the idea of going into Greek life or residence life. And I had experiences in both during graduate school and decided, oh, heck no. No. And I then had my assistantship, though, in academic advising, because at the time, Miami was advising within their residence halls. So you did a lot in residence life with academic advising. And again, I had been wronged so terribly at Bowling Green. So I kind of focused more on that. I did have an internship in career services, which I loved, and I really wanted to make my career in career services. But I actually encountered a little bit of age discrimination along the way at the beginning. And then, but academic advising, again, was one of those areas where we don't care how old you are or how old you look or not look. we just need you to know your stuff. So yeah. So I have been an academic advisor now in academics. So I'm not an academic advisor anymore. I have been doing that now for 27 years. It's insane. It is insane. I've been at Columbus State for 20 years. So this will be my 20th year. I've been doing transfer work on and off for the entire 20 years here at Columbus State. But I officially moved into my current position as the coordinator in 2017. So I've now been doing it for 6 years. So yeah, it's I too have no goal of going back to school for anything higher education related. Sorry. Especially if Ted and obviously Jonathan or any of my any of my other colleagues who are getting their EDD or PhD, good for you. You go. If I ever go back to school, it will be to secure training and learning to do something in retirement, because obviously I will have to work until I die because I've made my career in higher education.
Social media certificate. Hey, we offer those at Tri-C in case you want to get one.
I know. And you know who's in charge of that? I think is one of my old sorority sisters. So she's a tenured professor at Tri-C. So it's kind of funny. Yes. Yes. And so it's kind of funny. She advertises it on her Facebook all the time. So yeah. I mean, don't you want to see a 75-year-old crusty woman?
Hey, it's my plan. I'm going to take the classes for free from when I can now. So, but Jonathan, why don't you tell everybody too? Yeah. I know you're the host, but we want to hear about you too.
Right. Well, exactly.
I'll share this partly. So obviously, Jonathan, I went to school for both my undergrad and my master's in higher education administration at the University of Akron. I worked for the transfer center at the University of Akron for 3 years after graduating. Before I had graduated my master's program, I had some experience in advising and admission, so it kind of just made sense. My director at the time thought, for me to get into transfer work, and I had not been a transfer student, so I didn't know about it. My wife had been a transfer student, girlfriend at the time, whatever you say. So I had kind of seen it from that perspective, but not my own. So, but getting into the work, I immediately, liked the student population and knew that there was a lot of, proactive things that we could do and be a part of in betterment for that. So I got involved. We'll get into the OTC questions later, but that's where I got involved with OTC. And then I started at Kent in 2020. So I worked from home for a good while, training online, all that fun, weird stuff back, in those times, and started working more in person the second half of 2021. So I've been at Kent State ever since. And, I've liked my role here and I appreciate all the opportunities and stuff. So enough about me. You guys kind of glossed on it. I did want to ask you specifically, what you guys talked about, how your time before working with transfer students might have even outlasted now your time working with transfer students in your current roles and your current positions at your current institutions. Would you guys like to share? Mary, would you like to start? What drew you to this job working with transfer students coming from, advising, maybe the path kind of makes sense, but this position might have opened up. Could you explain kind of that for us?
Yeah. So I was the most traditional of traditional students. The only thing, I guess, non-traditional about me was that I was first generation. But, I went away to school. I lived away. I stayed at the same school the whole time. So I really had no designs on ever working with, any different sort of population. And then when I was at Miami, I got assigned the commuter students as the advisor. And that was really my first taste of working with a population that wasn't well supported, which transfer students typically are at a four-year school. And then going along with that, I worked at a branch campus in Miami, and that's all about, that whole dynamic. And then fast forward, I really didn't think about it again until I worked at Ohio State. And I would get a lot of students coming over from Columbus State, and I felt really bad for them because there just was no place for them to get information. And the information we were giving them wasn't great. And it was sort of like at that time, which was for any OSU people listening, that was over 20 years ago. It was like, so like, we're Ohio State. Like, why do we need to give them information? Like, that's just who we are. Like, it doesn't matter. And so then Columbus State had part-time jobs, and that's what I needed at the time for my family. So by default, I became involved in transfer, because when you work at a community college, you work with transfer, especially if you work in the academic advising space. Doesn't matter what major, what program, anything you do, every conversation is permeated with that information. So you work with it long enough, and I'm a big information geek. That is like my thing. And so when this job came open, I had to come over because I'm in charge of all the pathways for the college. And I really felt like that was a better use of my knowledge and what I wanted to do, and a better, like, I mean, I don't know how to say this nicely, but I've had a long career working with students, and I was ready to do something a little different where I wasn't working one-on-one with students every day. And so now I have the opportunity to still work with students, but just work in a different way. And then to also work with a lot of professionals outside of the school and just get to do a lot of different things. So I love transfer. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing all that.
Oh yeah,
Well,
sorry.
No,
it's
that's
cool.
I love to hear this stuff, and I am especially interested, obviously, in hearing an equally long response from Melissa from getting from the athletic job that she was in to now transfer. So that one not as close as like the advising to transfer. So
Yeah.
very curious. Yeah.
So I think back to like my whole kind of career. My first job out of grad school was being a regional consultant for Phi Sigma Phi, which is the national co-ed national honor fraternity. Boy. And over 2 years, I visited 35 colleges and universities. So like a lot of exposure and really getting to see like all the differences. I love talking with like the students I met with, like, why did you choose? What are you majoring in? Did you know that in Michigan, and I can't remember if Central Michigan or Western Michigan, they have a major paper science, 100% placement rate. Like, I just loved learning about all these schools and opportunities and just how students decided on where to go. So I think that was kind of maybe the very first time like that seed was planted, not necessarily about transfer, but kind of this decision of kind of entering higher ed. I also changed my major 5 times when I was in college. So I understood this fact that when you start, you don't necessarily know what the end goal is. And I think we all know, like, did I think I would be doing this? No, I thought I'd be a nurse. I thought I'd be an anthropologist. I thought I'd be working in epidemiology. No, this is what I do. So I think, like, considering all of that, I remember being in grad school thinking I'd never work in alumni relations. I'd never work in athletics. I'd never work at a community college. I have done all of those. And coming to Tri-C was after a period of time when I was out of higher ed for about 2 years. And so it was kind of just I was trying to find a job, and I came here, and this was a whole new student population that I had not worked with. But I was in my comfort zone in student life and student activities, leadership, and all of that. So just in my time at Tri-C, kind of moved around, had the opportunity at Tri-C. We had something called the design. I don't even remember. Like, we did our campus design projects, and one of those projects we were on random teams, and the project I was on focused on creating a cohort program for transfer students. And so that was and out of that came the Tri-C Transfer Centers. So prior to that, the transfer center didn't exist at Tri-C. So like our concept evolved. We started with a transfer center. So that was kind of the first, but I wasn't working in that space. But because I was in student life, they would say, hey, Melissa, do you want to go visit the University of Akron with our students? Because we need more people to go. Or do you want to go to Kent State? So like, I would go as the student life coordinator. Eventually ended up as the director of student activities. I don't even remember my title, athletics and recreation at one of our campuses. And honestly, they were going to get rid of the athletic and recreation part from our, student engagement. That didn't happen. And I'm like, I have a young child. This doesn't really work with what I want to do. And then the opportunity came up in our transfer center. And I was like, you know what? It's something new. You get rejuvenated when you try something new and you have to learn. I think that was the thing, is when I had to take on athletics, I realized if I can learn athletics, I can kind of learn other things. So I like learning new things. And so been here since January of 2018, have reported to 5 different people. Been reorganized 3 times, but we are still standing, and we are very supported right now by a campus president who is our college president, that's a huge transfer champion. So I'm very excited about that. But I think the thing that I realized, there's no direct line. It's a zigzag all over the place. And so hopefully, Jonathan, that was a long enough answer, but not too long, so.
It wasn't long enough for me. No, totally kidding. No, I always love hearing about that. And I know you two personally, so I knew some of that, but even through these, I learned new things. So, which kind of brings us, I think, to our next point, because you guys have been, switching kind of like the student populations you work with and becoming more involved and learning more things. And that brings us to the fact that we all are on the OTC exec board right now. And we have been here, each of us have been here for years at this point, and kind of seen the inner workings of how we did during the pandemic and the different conferences that we've planned and done webinars and all of that stuff. But how did the both of you really, what was the starting point? How did you guys get on the council? And how have you enjoyed being on it so far? I think technically, Mary, you are our treasurer, so maybe you were right before Melissa. So why don't we just start off with you again?
I think there's a common thread for all 3 of us, and his name is Ted. I'll just lay it out there. And Ted, if you're listening, it's your fault.
I nominated Ted, so this is all my fault.
Yeah. Okay. Then it's you. Then I should be blaming you.
The problem is you. Yes.
Oops. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting. I went to an actual Ohio Transfer Council conference, probably in 2004. It was here in Columbus. That was one of the few times we ever got professional development paid for as a part-timer. And so I was just really craving it, because a lot of my positions that I've had, and I have worked for other institutions besides Ohio State and Columbus State, but the funding just was never there for professional development. And, it's important. And I think it's an important investment, but unfortunately, it's not all these things, the other things I have to pay for, like my mortgage and my children and cars. I've just never had the extra money to really get involved. So I've always wanted to be involved. But Ted came to campus, we ran a grant together, and he's like, hey, we have this space open on council. Have you ever thought about being involved? And I had presented at the conference by this time a few times, so I was more familiar with the organization as it existed 5 or 6 years ago. And I said, yeah, sure, maybe. And he's like, how about treasurer-elect? I'm like, I don't even balance my own checkbook. Are you sure?
Oh, and now you tell us.
I know. And I was like, really? And he goes, it's easy. You have a person who is the treasurer right now. She'll show you everything, which true. But then what happened, that was 2019. We had exactly maybe 1 or 2 meetings before the pandemic. And then boom, we shut down. And the treasurer, unfortunately, lost her position. And, she wasn't in higher ed anymore. And then I got the books and I was like, well, okay, this is it. And it's just been really great. The thing I like so much about it is the camaraderie that we have with the board. That talking to each other, having the ability to, and I will say, I love the virtual piece of it, but I miss being together in person. It's just hard trying to bring that back. But yeah, I got involved in 2018, 2019 as treasurer-elect. And then again, somebody just said, oh, hey, somebody nominated you to be president. And I was like, okay. But, and I've said this before, it is really hard when you get involved with something, thinking about leaving it and thinking like, oh, we've all been involved in this we have all this knowledge, we've all went through it. So it feels really weird giving your 2 years and like, peace out, like that kind of thing. So it made sense to me to remain involved and do it. And honestly, I would probably stay involved. I don't, I like everybody. I like the work that we do. I'd like to see us grow and blossom. I've enjoyed being under Melissa. I'll enjoy being, on the other side with Jonathan. So I think it's a great organization to be involved with. And I'll put in a plug like I always do right here for all of you listening. It is a great professional development experience if you are afraid of taking that first step. If you're doing any sort of nascent research for your PhD, if you have this really great project and you feel like, oh, it's not really super cool, hey, we all want to hear about it. So talk to us, write a proposal for a conference. Let's do a PODTC cast. Let's do a webinar. Let's do something, because this is what we're all here for, is to learn off of each other. So small plug aside.
I love that plug.
Yeah.
Melissa, you started not too long after Mary came to us. So what was that experience like for you?
So funny story. I remember, so nominations come out in like April of every year. Yeah. So, I think at that point, so I started in this role in 2018. I think I had been to 2 conferences, one of which I had led a roundtable at, and then the other, and also presented at or whatever, where I met Mary at our roundtable with community colleges, which was awesome. And I get an email from a Tri-C colleague after the nomination comes out saying, I nominated you. True story. Thought it was a joke, knowing this person. And I'm like, what? So I thought nothing of it. Didn't give it a second thought. I get a call from Ted. Hey, Melissa, we've accepted your nomination, but we need XYZ from you to move it forward. I'm like, what nomination? So anyways, I was actually nominated. So I had a conversation with Ted. I'm like, Ted, I have yet to be involved in OTC. How do I jump into being president? Like that was like, help me understand. He goes, oh no, I was in the same situation. You'll be fine. There's plenty of people. So I thought about it. I asked my boss, can I do this? And she was very supportive, knowing that I knew people that were on the board. Especially Ted, who's somebody I had worked closely with, I felt comfortable kind of moving forward. So move forward with it. I was the only one nominated, so hence here I am. So that was my road to OTC. I will say that, as I was thinking back on this, that I think because it happened a lot during COVID, it was one of the things that kept me connected to other professionals, in terms of our meetings and just different things. Got to meet people I connected with people I didn't get a chance to because we weren't coming together. My staff, I really have encouraged OTC involvement because it's just an easy way to get involved. The people, but just like the connection, professional development has been great. And I think like Mary said, I think about my time is coming to an end here in June in this formal role on executive board, but I need to find a way to stay involved because wait, if I don't have OTC, what am I going to do? I still feel I want to be, just because there's so much to learn from your colleagues. Also to support new professionals that are coming into it. I'm really I've only been in transfer for 5 years, but in terms of where I am in my career, I feel like I have things to offer other professionals that may not just be about transfer. And I'm also a huge advocate for community college students. And like Mary said, we don't get a lot of professional development money. So a lot of times you don't hear community college advisors or personnel's voices in other organizations. And I think it's really important to hear that. And so, yeah, OTC is great. We had a great social, we came together for the first time in I don't know how many years last year for our annual conference. And if you really want to know how important this organization is to everybody or how closely knit of community is, just being at that social and seeing how excited professionals were. And we had new people there who we got to connect with that are new. And it was just so great. And so I think those are just examples of why my time in this role is almost done. I am not done with OTC, and OTC is not done with me yet. So yeah, my 2 cents.
Well, I mean, we're obviously going to keep having you around, Melissa, so don't worry. This isn't really about me, but I should probably share how I came into this role as well, since so back in 2018, I'm the odd person out. Kim Avery from Youngstown State reached out to me and was like, hey, we need some help doing like communication stuff, social media, things of that nature. So I asked my supervisor at the time, who's not Ted, because he is now, but it wasn't back then. And I was like, hey, Greg, can I do this? And he's like, absolutely, go ahead. So I start on the board and I don't know anyone. I was fairly new in my role. I was in my role for less than a year. I knew some people in Northeast Ohio, didn't quite know as many people from around the states. And then no one from that board is still on the board, just because, every few years, we see new faces. It's a good thing to keep the new ideas coming in and new people. And but so I had done that for a few years. That's where we needed a president at the time. And I had known Ted just because Kent State UA are pretty close. So I was like, you should totally do this. And it was funny because he was like, I don't know, I've never been on the board. And this seems to be a thread. I was like, don't worry about it. We got plenty of people around. They'll show you how to do it. And he was a great, for 3 years. It was great. But when we had done in-person conferences before that, those are always pretty good. And then we hit the pandemic and kind of all of that went to the wayside for a little bit, but then we kind of evolved and, I got the webinar series off the ground and started that. And then we've been doing that for a while. We just kind of changed over a while. I didn't know how to do a virtual conference and I built that through Zoom, and I don't want to do it again, but it was a good experience to do it once. And I can say
Twice.
that I've done
Twice. You did it twice.
We did a meeting the first time because it was kind of it was 2020. No one knew what they were doing. Then the second year we're like, it's really iffy. We still shouldn't do this. So then we were building breakouts and stuff. And that's where things got a little dicier. And then this past year we were like, we still had to wait a while, which is why some of this conference we were planning kind of last minute. Amanda Means and Ann and everyone did great. It was an awesome conference, but obviously they were on a condensed schedule. And for us, we were chipping in, it was definitely mostly the professional events committee, but they really did an awesome job. And I can mirror what you both have said, getting to that social was cool. And I'm like, I haven't seen you guys in 3 years, some of you. And then we did the conference at Columbus State. And I don't remember when Mary said that building was built, but it's a little newer than maybe, and super nice downtown Columbus and stuff. So it's been a really good ride for me. 2 more years, and I think my formal role, but also I joined in 2018. So I think by that time I might be it's time for new people and to fully, and I'll be good. But in the meantime, it's been a fun ride. So I should stop blabbing though, because no one's here to hear me talk. So we the importance of OTC and people being involved in gathering has been, at least maybe a topic of this conversation so far. But we've seen the state of transfer kind of shift, and we've seen higher education shift in Ohio, just even throughout the last decade. But if you look historically, things look a lot different than they used to. Where do both of you see the direction of transfer going in our state, and really how do you see OTC's role within it? I let Mary go first the last couple of times. So Melissa, you want to start us off with this one?
I can. So I'm using the lens a little bit of Northeast Ohio, because I think in terms of when I think about the students we serve, and I do think this plays out across the state, but I think the two biggest things in higher education that we're looking at and that relate to transfer are the equity gap, like the achievement gap, and making sure we fulfill workforce needs. And some of the challenges that we're encountering is the lack of confidence in higher education, like the value of a degree, as well as working against a gig economy. So like those both don't lend well to people wanting to go to college. So I think institutionally, we're going to look at, those two things, like those two opposite things, and how do we approach them? And I think the state will. And part of that, just higher ed overall, is the transfer piece. And so for us here at, in Cuyahoga County, at Tri-C, working with our partners, is thinking about, like, most of our students yes, the degree is the long-term goal, but I need to be working along the way. And so in transfer, the focus has always been those transfer-friendly degrees, as we like to call them, the Associate of Arts, the Associate of Science, but we need to focus on those applied degrees and how we create pathways to a bachelor's degree, looking more at 3+1s, where a student gets their applied degree, they can get some gen eds, and then they can complete the bachelor's degree. I just think that's going to be so much more of what we're looking at, because we have to meet students, like, their behaviors have changed. That's a result of COVID. That's a result of the economy, and just like the overall confidence in it. Modality and flexibility, like, are key. Those are not flexibility in higher ed is just not something we normally, like, flexibility, that's not something you would normally associate with. I think there are institutions that we associate flexibility to. So in the state of Ohio, I think the key for higher ed is, how are we flexible? Because if we're going to educate our population, that's what we need to be. And so I think the other piece is this continued growth of College Credit Plus. And so students graduating from high school with substantial college credit, as well as degrees, associate's degrees. I think back to John Fink, who is our researcher at the Community College Research Center. Great guy, so much in that brain. But their research has shown that dual enrollment, or CCP program, is really what's going to close the achievement gap. And so the roles that especially community colleges have in that. And even though it's not an actual transfer, because those students are still first year when they land at a 4-year school, the process in ensuring all of the credit transfers is still our world. So I think that is a big part of it. And, in terms of OTC, I think really the role of OTC is sharing best practices. Like, I think that's what I get a lot from my colleagues is, what are you doing? We might not be at the exact same type of institution, but there's a piece or a conceptual part of what you're doing that I can take back and try. And, kind of look at that networking. I remember just calling Mary. I'm like, hey, like, literally had this conversation about a year ago, Mary, or maybe it was this summer, like, how do you do your scheduling and sign up for your 4-year schools? Because Sign Up Genius is just not my friend. And like talking through little things like that. But I was able just to say, Mary, I need help with this, and talk through how she does it. So I think just providing that network. I also think we have the opportunity to provide feedback about pain points to the ODHE. They are active participants in professional development. And we can share that, like, here's what's not working for our students. And, whether it's when they land at the 4-year school or when they're working, what support is needed, what systems do and do not work. So I think, I always tell students when I'm out during high school recruitment, which I do with some of our recruiters, or talking to high school counselors, we are blessed in the state of Ohio to have so many state guarantees that I can say, when you come to a community college here, there's so many guarantees about what's going to transfer to a public four-year school. And I also think that we'll see more of our privates come online with some of our state guarantees as we're seeing. So that's my whole spiel. Sorry.
Yeah.
No
No,
reason to apologize at all. Yeah.
Yeah. And I would echo everything that you said. I think down here, and I've often said this to Melissa, is that I was sort of jealous of her geographic location, because she did exist in the pocket of Northwest, Northeast Ohio. But I mean, theoretically, you're close to Akron, you're close to Kent, you have Cleveland State, and you're not really that far from Bowling Green and Toledo. And here it's all about the black hole that is the Ohio State University. And just this morning, I'll use this as an illustration of the direction of transfer in Ohio, or at least in where I'm at in Ohio. I had a student come in. He's an older adult student, typical of community college, frittered away his 20s. Now he's back. And for the last year and a half, he's been working on transfer to Ohio State and comes here. And this could be a reflection on Columbus State. I absolutely apologize, but maybe it's valid. Comes here, and I said to him, well, you just told me you only take 1 or 2 classes at a time. You realize that's not going to really fly at Ohio State. And I'm like, it's going to be really difficult for you to, and he's like, I never thought of that. And I think there's this impression that we really need to work on, not only at our level, but with four-year colleges, in educating students. Students, even if they're second generation, if they're older and they're away from, we need to, and I'm guilty of it too, the jargon, the stuff, but we need to always assume that we need to go back to the baseline and say, hey, this is what college is going to look like for you. This is our expectation, especially with transfer students. And I think with CCP, the thing that's been so frustrating for me as it has evolved in Columbus and in Ohio as a whole is that, yes, they are viewed as first-year students, but academically, they're juniors, a lot of them going into it. So you're asking, 14, 15, 16-year-olds to make choices about the classes that they take in high school based on, their career. I'm sorry, that's a thing. Like we the science that you take, the math that you take, it's based on those decisions, and then keep that decision going all the way through. And then I think there's an idea of how the credit is going to play out. I mean, it's been sold as a cost savings, and it certainly is. But then a lot of people realize when they get, like how much of a cost savings it is or it is not. And so it's been really tough to try and get everyone level in understanding exactly, because like Melissa said, I mean, I have students who come from second generation college students, professional parents, everything, who are sitting around daily going, why am I doing this? Why am I planning on taking out $50,000, $60,000, $100,000 worth of loans for what? Like, nothing about this is showing me that I'm going to get. I mean, it's not a fantastic economic time out there. And so I think it's a tough sell, but it's a necessary sell. So now I feel like I'm doing this and I'm getting all this information together so that when you decide that you are done, because the other thing we think about, everybody's pushing the trades, but you can't be a carpenter. I mean, you can, but in some cases, something may happen to you physically that you can no longer do that heavy construction work as early as the age of 40. Then what do? You have to do something forever. So we are that space, and transfer is a part of that at any point. And I think it's great to work in Ohio. I just wish more 4 years would help us out. Not Kent. Kent's great. But as far as, helping us out in the sense that people are coming to you, like, and we're bringing you people. Let's all like help each other and make sure that information's there. And I wish dual admission was bigger, honestly. I wish we could afford and had the people power behind that we could support more dual admission programs with people and personnel. Like, I just think that really is a good answer to some of this. I don't know, but yeah, I can't tell you.
Well, and I think, Mary, like when you said kind of along that lines, like we talk a lot from the community college perspective. We do a lot here to help push
Yes.
students. I'm hoping in the future we see much more pooling by our four-year
Yes.
schools. So that, you know, I think, of course, from my perspective, I've loved to see the infrastructure for transfer success built up within the state at the four-year level, because it's not just about the credits. So like a lot of times, I think what Ohio does well is the credit part, but the experience is the part that we have the opportunity to improve significantly on. And I think there are pockets of that. I think we have a problem with scale, like you said. We have a really hard time scaling things up. We are very, you know, get a grant here, get a grant there, and you can do it for a little bit, but then there's no longevity there. So,
Yeah, and I think it's tough too that, like, I understand why four-year colleges and universities make these decisions about coming up with these really, like, I was looking at a program yesterday and it had all these really creative, like, extracurricular requirements, but they really did do the time. And they had, but for transfer students, we're only going to require this because we recognize that you have this experience you bring to the table. And I think that's been tough too, is that there are a lot of four-year universities that gatekeep majors. And that's been really tough too, because it's not, we have a lot of very capable students that chose to remain here because of all sorts of purposes, not because of academics. And I think I feel really bad for them when they're gatekept from certain majors in finishing, you know, in a timely manner, or just even getting into those majors at all, just because they had to make a very hard decision not to go away to a four-year or not to go to a four-year from the beginning. I think that's a really hard thing to see with transfer. And I think it's hard for students to accept and understand. So.
And that kind of prompted something else. Like, I think the credit for prior learning, at least for us here at Tri-C, and even conversations that we've had with Cleveland State, like if you've got somebody who's been working in an engineering firm, has a tech engineering degree, how can we get them some credit for the 20 years they've been working so that they can get a completion bachelor's degree? That's just one example. But I think it is like acknowledging that there is, like, we're talking about transfer credit, but you have to give the experience some credit too, opposed to sitting in a classroom. And so I think that will be another, I think that's going to take some time, but I think that's part of the conversation too. And people, you know, who have non-traditional credits. I have a student who has an English proficiency certificate from the University of Cambridge, cannot figure out how to get the student credit for English 1010 and 1020.
Right, because it's from a foreign country. That's what we're told. I had to give a Canadian student a placement exam. And I was like, this is ridiculous. But these are the quirks about higher ed that I think are frustrating. And I love the idea of PLA and I love the idea of all that. But in the back of my head, there's always this yawning thing going, but is anybody else going to take it? You know, and that's the piece you really get irritated about when you think about it, is that, you know, here you have this person who has all of this in their brain already, and maybe we can figure out a way to qualify it and give it some credit, but then does it have any value beyond our walls? Like, that's always a concern. And for what they want to do too, where they want to go.
Well, and I think that's where, like, if we have if it's a course that the state recognizes as a transfer course, then
it's, and the state has done a great job with that piece. And I think, that's been wonderful. And I will put a little plug in here for Franklin University for their own proprietary program. I mean, honestly, if we could get a program like that for a lot of our partners, and really, if we could get the state to kind of build it out or do something similar to what California is doing, so that we can get these really sophisticated planners and these applications that make it so easy for a student to go in and understand and do, and advisors, and not, it's so hard, but like that is something that has been really good for us to work with. And quite frankly, it helps push students to and fro. When students know what they're going to do and where they're going to go and how it's laid out for them, they're going to choose that versus somebody just saying, oh, but we offer, I say that to reps all the time, but we offer, all these tuition discounts and we have this great online program. And I was like, but you don't tell us how you take your credits. And they're like, oh, it's super easy. We just take 90. And I'm like, but you do, but then you don't outline how it looks. Yeah. So I think there needs to be more transparency on the 4-year sides too, for some of these, especially,
Novel idea from Ted.
Yeah.
He mentioned this at one of our meetings, and it was the Articulation and Transfer Network way back when. All public institutions in the state of Ohio use one application, and then your information, your educational record is in one place.
Yeah. Which, I mean, theoretically it can be done.
Oh,
I mean, and I think, and it's so funny because I work at an institution that has been super, super resistant to sharing information, and it's been a slog. And, just the fact that we got the Franklin portal approved, just one little piece. But I mean, that's the other direction it's going. We need to start being okay with sharing information. We can educate students on what they're doing. We can let them know what it means. But I think they're super appreciative of it too, when they have that information.
And if you think about Generation Z, that's what they're going to want. They're just going to want to be, they want that information at their hands. I feel like, Jonathan, we've hijacked your little interview here. So
you're not hijacking anything. The whole point was for you guys to talk. So, I mean, I couldn't have scripted it any better, obviously. We are running up to time, but I at least wanted to ask you something, something just to close us out. So we'll do kind of like, maybe not rapid fire, but like a quicker answer.
Okay.
Because you're talking about, I wanted to ask, do you guys have any advice for new professionals or just professionals looking to take on a larger role with assisting transfer students in the state of Ohio? I know our first answer is always going to be do something with OTC, do a webinar, let Jonathan interview you, do something like that. Join the executive board if you would like that kind of experience. But there's other ways for students to get involved as well. Is there anything that either of you could say to those professionals looking to just take on some sort of a larger role? It might just be at their institution, but
here's what I'll say. If you're at a 4-year institution right now and you have a hankering to help transfer students, is number one, tell people that, and then just offer to see transfer students and try and gain whatever knowledge you can to work with whatever piece of that process. If it's I'm thinking back to my past experience, if it's you have a transfer credit committee, or you have a transfer credit coordinator, or somebody where if an incoming transfer student is reaching out to an advisor in your major, they have somebody who is a little bit more familiar with some of the processes, maybe the petitioning, but just to think about that and not be so quick with the no. Hey, let me ask questions about this. And I think that's an excellent way if you're at a 4-year school you don't want to leave, cushy advising, which I don't blame you. I don't know if I would make the switch to admissions all the time. But I mean, that's a great way to be involved at the academic side of a four-year institution, and just to be welcoming and to support like orientation, transfer orientation, support, offer to volunteer if your office is fine with it, to talk to transfer students. That is the number one thing. We love having connections at the four-year institutions that we can send our students to, like OSU Engineering, for example, any of those people. So if that's a great way to be involved at the four-year side, is just let somebody know that you're there. And then at the community college level, like, just, I guess, breathe. But I mean, seriously, if you really, really want to get down and dirty in the trenches and work with transfer students, you need to go work at a community college. But otherwise, if you're at the community college already and you want to get involved, just offer your help. Like, there's always some sort of open house. There's orientation. There's advising, even student life. I mean, we have activities, we have events. We try to get people, and even just doing something simple as sharing your experience with students in some way, being a mentor, being, free and available to talk to them. People love talking about their alma maters. And then conversely, students love hearing about those experiences, especially if you've been a transfer student. They feel so all alone. And I think that's a great way to get involved. So that's my take, but I'm sure Melissa has a better answer.
No, I don't have a better answer. So I was thinking, like, ahead of this, and regardless of where you're at, there are things like Transfer Nation on Facebook, which is a whole national community. And so it's an opportunity, just sometimes reading those posts and understanding what other people are doing, like, just gives you a perspective of what is possible. Also, the National Student Clearinghouse, they will do webinars about, so I'm a data nerd. Ugh, I love data. And so I love those webinars because they're always based on their most recent research and what they have. So, like, just to me, knowledge is power. So, like, if, as I look to advocate or get involved more with the work and transfer, it's understanding the data behind it. So nationally, but also at your institution. So, like, depending on your role, it might be like people might not be looking at that data, and looking at the data actually provides a great opportunity to advocate, to connect with those students. Like, has anybody asked how your transfer students are doing? Looked at their success rates? Like, so just depending where you're at, I would, look at the data, because nobody's looking at it, especially at the four-year schools. And look at it, I would encourage you with an equity lens, because transfer success is not just about the overall numbers, because there is a disproportionate outcomes related to transfer success with our students of color, with our first generation, low income students. So, kind of thinking about that kind of possibilities. Our colleagues here are great resources just to kind of talk through. I shared an example, like, I went on a trip, I worked in student life. They just knew that I was willing. And that was really, like, if I wouldn't have been able to say some of that stuff when I interviewed for my position here in the transfer center and showed that interest, I think that was, like, this was something, even though it was my role, I still got involved with. So I think there are those opportunities. Of course, OTC, we're not going to forget that. But there are a lot of opportunities for mentorship. I also think the other thing is transfer is it's admissions, it's advising, it's registrar. There's the technical aspect of it in terms of technology. So there are so many parts to it that you can put your hands on, and that every institution is touching in some way. It might not be called transfer per se, but it involves transfer. So looking for those opportunities as well. And I'm sure there's other things, but that's what comes off in the top of my mind.
Thanks, guys. Well, this has been very enjoyable. We spoke a little longer than I think that we were originally projecting, which is not a problem, but I should probably keep it short and sweet. for us to get wrapped up. Thank you to you both. This has been a pleasure of mine. Hopefully we can do more stuff like this soon. We should have some announcements about the conference not too long from now for this June. Some more details about that. We're going to have some webinars coming up this spring semester, and then we're looking forward to do more interviews. So PODTC, come on, it's going to happen. But
yay.
All right, thanks again, guys. We'll see y'all later.
Bye.
Bye.